If fear is truly the mind killer, what did we as fans have to fear heading into Dune by Denis Villeneuve? For me, the relief that the dense novel wouldn't be compressed into one film accompanied the understandable fear that a global pandemic, combined with a recovering theater industry, wouldn't garner the necessary success for a part two, a finale to this story thought for years to be unfilmable. Fear that this story would never be adapted in a way that felt true to its scope and scale. It's only fitting that fear would be an integral part to the viewing experience, as fear is at the heart of this saga. Fear of death, loss, power, and pain. Beyond that, Dune is a story of control. Control over your fear and your destiny. It's represented in Duke Leto, who has no choice but to accept the contract to run Arrakis despite knowing of its trap. Or by Lady Jessica, who chooses to have a son instead of following the direction of the Bene Gesserit sister she was raised by. Even the fall of House Atreides is brought upon by one man's fear being leveraged against him, and in a twisted way, his decision allows him to gain agency in his own goal to save his wife. The ultimate force looming over the original story is not the immediate threat presented by the Harkonnens, but the Emperor of the known universe who takes center stage from the beginning. As if the Wizard of Oz wanted to make sure we knew he was pulling the levers behind the curtain. We see this played out in many places of the original text, be it the early reveal of the traitor or the scheming machinations of the Emperor. We as the audience are often made aware of information that the players on the board are not. In a story with fractured visions of numerous futures, this creates a balancing act of information being withheld and revealed on different levels. With the knowledge of what moves the pieces at play, the flashes of potential future we see are given additional tension and context, but from the opening scene, the differences to past iterations of Dune are on display. Much of the strength of Villeneuve's Dune comes from the pieces of information withheld from the audience. The Emperor remains hidden from the story throughout its entire runtime. The name of the mouse shadow on the second moon dances just out of reach like the sands in the wind. The traitor, so integral to making sense of the collapse of House Atreides, is pulled back to maintain its greatest effect, building tension like an arrow aimed upon the viewer. Instead of experiencing the story and schemes as we are aware of play out, much of the information is provided to us at the same pace as the characters, allowing us to sit in the mystery of the situation. Characters within the story are all held hostage by the whims of their fears, and we get glimpses into the ways that this motivates them. The Emperor, unseen and wielding unfathomable strength of elite Sardaukar warriors, uses them to foment conflict between houses, powerful and out of a fear of his enemy's strength. Duke Leto of House Atreides, regretful of actions not taken, fears the moments left unfelt and the words left unsaid. These fears lead him to grip tightly to the reins of his destiny, keenly aware of his impending fate. Oscar Isaac fits the visual and emotional tone the story sets for him. He gives off the warmest of dad energy and exudes patience and understanding, a wonderful contrast to the willful nature of his son. When he told Paul that the only thing he needed from him was for him to just be his son, I felt that. Lady Jessica, one of the few players with more information than they let on, is calm and stoic around others, but fears the results of events set in motion by her choices. Choices she aims not to regret. The acting by Rebecca Ferguson is masterful here, able to deftly portray the balance between her two worlds. And Paul Atreides, left without agency in the story in many ways, is racked with visions of his life and death. Timothée Chalamet plays a conflicted and introspective Paul, and expertly portrays a teenager grappling with changes within himself and the world around him, as well as the fear that comes with the weight of expectations placed upon him. By the end, though, he will press on, aware of the consequences and accepting of the great costs his actions will incur. We open not with the Imperium, but with Arrakis and the Fremen. We hear about the Emperor, but do not see him. Instead of up front, he remains obfuscated from us throughout the movie, a stark change from previous takes which start with the scheme wide out in the open. We get to see more of Paul's time with his mother, actual training in the Bene Gesserit way, the voice. I think it's portrayed really well here, where There's not as much magic to it as it is a keen sense of awareness of the individual you're throwing the voice at. We learn about the spice and hear some imperial propaganda about the Fremen, a sacred hallucinogen to some, but the Imperium, it allows them safe passage through the stars. Its importance is still kept up front and immediate in our minds. The movie is visually mesmerizing. With each new faction and planet, we see new crafts and architectural aesthetics that build multiple worlds up at once. We feel the grounded nature of the individual houses broken up with the otherworldly strangeness of the Imperium. Masked religious garb with gaseous bubble heads, matte black visors, and hooded crones. The beauty of Caladan is necessary to experience. It needs to feel like the comfort only home can bring, so that as we transition into the harsh environment of Arrakis, the difference is striking. We spend time with Duncan Idaho, well captured by Jason Momoa, building up this relationship more than past iterations have. Paul has an ensemble of perspectives and relationships that make him who he is, and Duncan, one of the few seemingly with no fear, also seems to have the most control over his life. Dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake, because that's where we make things happen. Time with Paul's teachers is vital, and some of the best moments come with his father. Oscar Isaac captures the essence of Duke Leto. He feels like a man digging his own grave, trying to impart some final necessary wisdom at every opportunity, love for his son and respect for those around him. He wanted to be a pilot, and later on we see that he's cultivated those skills despite his station, taking the opportunity. The ways in which various effects are visualized in this movie is fantastic. The soundscape combined with the visual flair truly captures the imagination of the book tried to convey. The shields activate and vibrate in the air. We see and feel the reverb as contact is made and search for faint glimmers of red as the slow blade penetrates the shield. Finally introduced to the Baron Harkonnen, played by Stellan Skarsgård, we feel the tense and menacing nature exuded from the hollow bounce of his voice against the walls of their insidious environments. This Baron is both intimidating and thankfully clever, able to discern the truth behind the Emperor's actions and convey them to the hot-headed Raban, aggressively portrayed by Dave Bautista, who conveys an indignant fury held back by a thread. When the Bene Gesserit enter, they are shrouded in mystery. Physically obscured and alien in feel, they hold enormous power in this world, and without too much exposition, their stature and standing is made clear. Able to order around the up till now calm and collected Jessica, who is terrified at the mother's presence. Then comes the test. The box. The Gom Jabbar meant to test his humanity. I must not fear. Both Paul and Jessica share the pain in some way, attuned to each other's experience. With that shared agony comes a shared mantra. Fear is the mind killer. Music kicks in, and chanting with fire as the feeling washes over Paul. Fear is the little death that brings obliteration. Pain rising and pulling at them both. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. Agonizing and unending, the words spoken by Jessica echo on the lips of the young Paul. When it is gone, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. The tone shifts as Paul, gaining control over himself, and his fear stares defiantly at the Reverend Mother. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. And as the litany against fear comes to a calm and controlled end, only I will remain. Having faced their fears in this moment, they both come out the other side resolute. Watching the calm come over Jessica and the indignant fury wash over Paul is like a snapshot into their minds in this moment, perfectly acted by both. We learn of the Bene Gesserit plans that become ruined by Paul's existence, but multiple plans allow for multiple responses to change, and an organization spanning centuries doesn't stick around without cunning and wit. We hear of crossed bloodlines, bridging and transcending space and time, contingencies set on dangerous planets that should not be squandered, The mysteries we are given complete view of in the book, previous iterations, are instead given to us along with the characters that should receive them. Exposition is naturally doled out in ways that immerse us and carry us along with Paul as opposed to spectating through the lens of dramatic irony. 30 minutes into the movie, we finally open to Dune. Previous tones of blue and green are now bleached white and brown by the sun and sand. Only moments have passed before we learn of the Bene Gesserit plans laid down like a welcome mat for Paul. The Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outer realm. The fascinating and horrifying idea of a century-spanning organization with far and deep enough resources to create their own baked-in mythology on planets all over the known universe. Though, on a planet like Dune, all the help is needed. Gone are the bountiful resources of a verdant world, held in stark contrast to the rocky and angular terrain of the capital city of Arrakeen. Spice, the most important resource on this planet from a universe perspective, is both plentiful and easy to attain, while the most important resource anyone on Arrakis itself could come by is scarce and holds tangible value: water. In one of my favorite scenes, we see Paul approach the groundskeeper tasked with keeping the planet's only plants alive. A monument to colonization. When Paul suggests saving the water, we learn that they've transformed these trees into a sacred meaning, an example of the cost of Arrakis. 20 palms, 100 lives. Every day is a sacrifice on this planet. The clean transition from finding the Harkonnen Hunter-Seeker and into Gadi Prime, the Harkonnen homeworld, allows us to connect the two separate locations in a tangible way. We finally see the Emperor make his next move, providing the Harkonnens with the help of their invasion. Allowing him to keep two powerful houses at each other's throats, the Baron still schemes, as he must find a way to dispose of his enemies without direct action lest they disobey the Emperor's orders. The political chess pieces begin moving into place. Back on Arrakis, we start to peel back the Fremen myth and add more simultaneously. They tricked the Harkonnens, making them think they were weak and few despite numbering in the millions. They are direct and do not submit to political theater, spitting on the floor to show their respect, acknowledging the cost of the body's moisture. Paul seems to agree with the Fremen leader's statement that they come unbidden and take without giving. Duncan provides the necessary context for understanding their strength, wisdom, and ingenuity, something vital to Paul's increasing respect for them. Building up Paul and Duncan's relationship in a more tangible way than any iteration before, this change is welcome as we see the myriad relationships that mold Paul into the person willing to take the reins of his destiny by the end of Part 1. In the beginning, he is hesitant and unsure, as a teenager could be, but trauma and fear can lend power to a person, and in this case gives Paul a chance to take agency over his life. Venturing into the desert with Liet Kynes, we see bits and pieces of Paul fitting into the puzzle of this planet. He will know your ways as if born to them. Flying into the desert provided a nice payoff where the Duke is given lots of characterization. Earlier he remarks that he wished he was a pilot. Well, here we see he kept up on those skills despite not being afforded the freedom to follow that path. Instead of riding as a passenger, he takes the controls himself, agency where he can manage it, even if his path was predetermined by his station in life. Sharp eyes and a soft heart, he notices the threat of the worms and urges human safety over profit gains, in clear contrast to his predecessors. As Paul is immersed in the spice for the first time, the movie perfectly captures its psychedelic and mind-expanding effects. Paul's visions were already an indication of his extraordinary mind, but after exposure to the spice, he becomes overwhelmed by a waking dream. He briefly mentions recognizing Gurney's footsteps, but in the desert? Little bits start to become clear as he clearly perceives more and more of the world around him. His eyes wide open, he sees potential futures and certain realities. He hears whispers from the planet and fragments from the present, the sound and visuals providing us a horrific vignette into his own death. He sees visions of weapons and family, enemies and allies. The worm remains shrouded in sand and mystique as they gobble up the spice harvesters that dwarf humans and change the very terrain around them. Only a vicious maw of ship-sized needles is visible as it sucks in the sand, spice, and anything else caught in its wake. Was this event another sabotage, or just the natural cost of the planet's heavy barrier for entry? In an interesting choice, we visit Seleucia Secunda, the source of the fearsome Sardaukar warriors, religious zealots, the blades of the Emperor. They are meant to feel as cruel as the environment they appear in, and they suit the visual and the aesthetic feel of the sort of shadowy power the Emperor represents. Returning to the Duke and Lady Jessica, it's refreshing to see the foundation of Paul's life built on mutual love and care for their son's future. The Duke feels the jaws of the trap bearing down, and we cut to a glimpse of the bull and matador. How many times can he wave his flag and dodge the violent force charging him down? Laying down with Jessica, he mutters his final regret. He should have married her. How fitting that our first real sense of a resting moment would be the last glimpse of light before the coming night. Where the original iterations of the story saw fit to plainly give us the answers to the riddle and let us view the players of the story through the lens of dramatic irony, here we see moments play out in real time. The traitor reveals himself, and with a discerning eye, you may have seen it coming. His tight-lipped response to the Bene Gesserits, his medicinal access to the family. It capitalizes on the removal of key plot points like the battle between the Mentat Thufir Hawat and the Lady Jessica as they attempt to weed out the traitor. The removal of any explanation of the Mentats is an interesting choice, but handled in a way that can be expanded on in Part 2 without breaking up the pacing of the story in an expository dump. Returning to betrayal, though, Dr. Yue is a perfect candidate in every version, but here his betrayal comes swiftly, and piece by piece we gain clarity. His fear left him powerless, and his captured love provided the necessary motivation to tear down a kingdom. The raid on the palace results in the death of many. We see the trees burn as the Harkonnens seek to raze everything down. Their lack of respect for the planet and its resources shown through its willful destruction. Harkonnen forces, weak and cowardly, are easily held back by small Atreides lines before the Sardaukar come in to power scale, quickly dispatching the Atreides forces and providing context to the enemy's true power. Duncan Idaho helps lend credence to the threat the Atreides represented. Able to defeat multiple Sardaukar himself, Duncan already had firmly set our expectation of the Fremen with his lofty praise of them earlier. He capably gives off the vibe that, in a fair fight, the Harkonnens would never have succeeded. But what is fair in war? Oscar Isaacs delivers one hell of a final performance as he is forced to suffer the torment of the Baron for one last chance at revenge. Paul and Jessica feel his passing as we bounce between the three of them, separated but bound through their love. The Baron exudes an air of gluttony and cowardice, or caution, raising his shield in front of the dying man just in time to survive the deadly poison. His visual aesthetic is one of gross filth, yet decadent splendor. His long flowing robes billow off of him as he floats using his anti-gravity harness. Paul, engulfed by fear and trauma and spice, begins his next transformation. Captured by visions of life and death, the warm smile of his murderer. Fremen warriors destroying Sardaukar soldiers with Paul as their leader. Bodies stacked and burning in the desert sands, hands bathed in blood as tears stream down his face. The Fremen cheering his name and worshipping at the altar of his father's skull, he sees the path his choices can lead them on, a wave of destruction across the galaxy. Still, he knows this is a future, not the future, but the other futures he has seen end in his death, making his potential choices deliberate and difficult. To press on means tragedy for many. The small breather we are afforded is cut short by Sardakar's soldiers. Where Paul thought his absence caused the vision of Dunk's death, it was his presence that ultimately sealed his fate. The extra work building this relationship is paid off here, as Duncan's sacrifice is the final push needed for Paul to choose his route. He resolves to press on, as the cost incurred so far is too great to waste. With this story so mired in fear and the way it influences people, Paul's greatest fears come to pass one after another. The fear of failing his father, the fear of losing his friends and family. He must move beyond the little boy lost in the desert if there is any hope for survival. Sometimes the cost of adaptation is high as well. Things we fear to lose may be cut in service of the story being presented or the change to a new medium. The change of Liet Kyne's death is a conflicting one for me. I remember being captivated by their internal monologue as they're stripped of their stillsuit and pushed into the desert, and through that process, let go of their fear and come to a transcendent understanding of the nature of Arrakis. This is repurposed into a vision of the future, a future where a lesson is learned and an immutable truth of the desert is imparted to Paul. We're quickly seeing the benefits of Paul's perspective, able to view numerous paths. He can learn a number of lessons. Now, navigating those paths becomes the challenge. With so many still ending in death, he cannot see past the choices he can't understand. The sandworms of Arrakis hold as much mystery as anything else in this world. Titans or gods, their legend matched only by their sheer scale. Dune leviathans warping the sands and rumbling the earth as they effortlessly traverse the desert so dangerous to others. Crashing waves of sand and spice with every movement, their presence is a force of nature itself, and the effect here is perfectly captured. Ultimately, though, Paul's goal is not escape from the desert, but into it. Interacting with the Fremen brings Paul to the brink of his visions. So many end right here, dead on the ground at the hands of his allies from another life. Here the myriad of visions clash. The one Fremen seemingly offering him advice and goodwill in several becomes his killer in another, and Paul is brought to the precipice of his fate. To press on means his own survival, but the potential of death scores across the universe. But having not taken a life yet, he will need to make the choice here. Giving Paul options of assured death or a galaxy-spanning war means his decision here matters more than any in the past. In the end, through this final proving, he takes the reins of his futures into his hands. He crosses the threshold into this world of death and accepts the call to action. In this moment of his first kill, a slight change from the original text, he feels the weight of his choice and its cost. The cost of a future with this man at his side, the cost of the futures of uncountable people beyond. His most important choice, though, seals his fate. His choice to stay on Arrakis. His choice to follow through his father's will, to acquire the strength necessary for vengeance. Having turned his inner eye to see the path where his fear has gone, only he remains. No doubt he feels the power agency provides, but it leaves the viewer with a sense of foreboding. At the end of Part 1, we see Paul accept his role, not as a hero, but as an avenger. He commits to the path of violence and insurgence against those that destroyed his house and accepts the potential cost of that path. Real care is taken throughout the story to present Paul as a nuanced character shaped by those around him. Through the fear of their loss and his visions of a fractured future laid out before him, we are left to wonder how much agency someone has if they merely follow a path, no matter how many they are provided. Does the one who sees the path laid out before them truly have agency? Do they hold power through prescience, or are they held captive by their fear? Dune is entwined with these questions, and while different in several ways, Villeneuve's Dune succeeds at setting the stage for a finale that could finally pay off the vision of Frank Herbert. Several important pieces have been pushed off and omitted in ways that feels purposeful, like the Mentats, the Spacing Guild, or Fade. So I can only hope that they are reincorporated meaningfully in the end. I have faith in this director and the team to handle the adaptation with care and respect as they have done so far. But they took out my favorite line about mood being for cattle and love play, so 4 out of 10.